compare fired components, fired cartridge cases, fired bullets, to determine whether they were fired in a particular firearm or not. Other duties include serial number restoration. Anytime a serial number is damaged or obliterated, to try to restore that serial number. And then finally, gunshot residue or distance determination, which is basically trying to get an approximate distance a firearm is from a particular target, whether it's clothing or anything like that.
And what is your educational background, sir?
I have a bachelor's degree in forensic science from the University of Central Florida, and also a master's degree in applied psychology from Lynn University.
And how long have you been employed by Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and any other law enforcement agencies?
I've been with the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office for a little over 12 years now, and before that I was a forensic scientist in the same capacity, a firearms examiner, with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's Orlando Crime Laboratory. I was there for approximately 7 years in that capacity.
So we're talking about 19, almost 20 years now in that specific capacity after education?
Correct, yes.
Very good. And do you routinely receive specialized training to keep you up to date in your area of firearms identification and evaluation?
Yes, there's different classes that I take. I attend yearly conferences that talk about different techniques having to do with firearms identification, distance determination, and other areas of firearms identification.
And are you a member of any organizations related to your work?
Yes, I'm a regular member of the Association of Firearms and Toolmark Examiners, which is a worldwide organization of firearms and toolmark examiners.
And have you ever testified as an expert before, sir?
Yes.
How many times?
It's over 100. I lost count specifically, but it's probably in the 120 or so range in both state court, county court, and federal court.
And sir, you mentioned earlier one of your duties is potential measurement of distances using firearm discharge residue. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
If you would please explain what firearm discharge residue is and how it would potentially end up on an object.
Sure. Basically what happens is that when a gun is fired, you have the combustion of the gunpowder that's found inside of the barrel. And not all of it burns, but most of it does burn. But what happens is that it actually comes out of the muzzle or the end of the barrel and deposits on the actual target. Now, how I explain it is it's actually quite simple, is sort of like if you take a flashlight and you put it up against a surface, you know, the light coming out of the flashlight is sort of nice and tight and small and condensed. The further you move away from the wall, the light gets much larger and much more diffused. Well, it's the same concept in gunshot residue. The closer the firearm is to the target, the more is going to be deposited on the target, but the pattern is going to be much smaller. The further away you get, the much more diffused the pattern is going to be.
And so talking about the residue itself, so we're talking about actual gunpowder out of that, and I'll call it a cartridge case because it's not just a bullet, but it's a cartridge case that actually houses gunpowder and a projectile or bullet in it, correct?
Correct. Basically what happens is describing a cartridge, let's just start out there sort of basic. A cartridge is an unfired piece of ammunition, and it's comprised of 4 basic components, and that is the cartridge casing, which is the brass casing. Then you have the gunpowder inside, then the bullet or projectile that sits on top of the cartridge, and then on the bottom of the, if you were to turn it on its side, there's something called a primer, which is a soft piece of metal that when the firing pin hits that primer, the primer creates a spark inside of the cartridge. That's all it does, is creates a spark. But that spark ignites the gunpowder and discharges and pushes the bullet out of the barrel. So,
go ahead, please.
Oh, no, I was going to say is that, so what happens with gunshot residue or the distance determination, the byproduct of burning gunpowder is something called nitrates. It's one of the byproducts. There's many byproducts. But the gunpowder is made up of nitrates. So what happens is that as it burns, it is converted into nitrites. So what happens is that as it's burning, it actually coats some of the unburned gunpowder, and that's actually what's deposited on the target, including lead from both the primer and also, again, residues from the cartridge. So that's what's being deposited on the target when the gun goes off.
And do all guns have some type of gun, say, discharge residue that will be expelled whenever they are fired?
Yes, because what happens is it's actually coming from the cartridge itself. It's actually coming from the burning cartridge itself, not the firearm per se. It's coming from the discharge of the ammunition. So yes, it's going to have some sort of deposit coming out of the muzzle end, out of the barrel.
And so when you see a very, very slow motion picture of a firearm being shot, and you'll see a muzzle flash, is that correct?
Correct. That's the burning gunpowder.
And you'll see the bullet slowly coming out of that barrel.
Yes.
And also you'll see this residue discharge coming right along with it and behind it too. Is that correct?
Correct. You'll actually see some particles actually fly out with the projectile itself. But obviously the projectile is going to travel much, much further than the particles, but it'll come out together.
And so those particles themselves, are they also at a very high temperature because of the combustion that just occurred?
Well, it's not high enough for it to burn because a lot of that, some of that gunpowder isn't burning, but the powder that is burning obviously is going to be at a high temperature because it is burning. But yes, but it is going to come out and actually going to deposit on the target.
And so when this discharge residue gets expelled from the barrel of a gun, it's hot. It's higher temperature than, I guess.
I would assume so. I'm not.
It's hot to the point that when it touches an object, it can actually affect that object because of the temperature of it.
Yes. The evidence that I have for that, or I've seen, is what will happen sometimes, it'll actually burn some of the fabric on clothing. You'll see small little holes. So it's hot enough to sort of melt occasionally. Now, it doesn't happen all the time, but it can sometimes melt some of the fabric. So it's hot, but again, it's not hot enough to burn. And
if it touches somebody's skin and it's close enough, it'll also create what's called stippling. Is that correct? Or actually little burn marks in the skin?
That I've seen. My expertise is not in the skin, distance determination with skin, because that reacts actually quite different. But my expertise is in clothing, and it has actually, I've seen where it actually will burn clothing.
Now, and you mentioned that you have that tight cone when you're very close, and then that circle starts to get larger and larger as you start moving away from the actual muzzle of that firearm.
Correct.
So when the object gets further away, then you could expect a larger pattern of gunshot residue.
Correct. Much larger and a lot more diffused, a lot less gunpowder.
And then is there actually a point at which you get so far away that you don't expect to see any gunshot residue?
Yes, every firearm and every combination of, even from cartridge to cartridge, will vary as to how far away that discharge actually will travel. And it's just physics. It's just the weight of the powder is only going to go so far. So yes, there is usually a distance that the powder will no longer be deposited onto the target.
And so if we see the existence of firearms discharge residue, what does that tell you?
Well, that basically that's a starting point, is saying, okay, there is discharge on the target, on the fabric. But then there has to be further testing to determine how far away the firearm was. Basically, there are two different types of tests that are done. They're basically color tests to determine, to actually visually see the actual gunshot residue. A lot of this gunshot residue you can't see with the naked eye. It has to be treated with chemicals in order to see the nitrites that I was describing before, and also to see the lead. So what happens is that if there's a gunshot residue found on a shirt or pants or whatever, other testing has to be done, basically with a firearm and with ammunition, to then determine how far away that garment was from the firearm.
And going through just the testing process of just initially determining whether or not there is firearm discharge residue on an object, what do you do?
The first is just a basic visual examination, taking notes, taking photographs of the actual garment itself, actually first locating any defects, any holes in the shirt that may have been created by a projectile. So first it's a visual examination to see if there's any gunpowder, unfired gunpowder, which is noted. And then I would perform a color test, as I mentioned before, to determine then if there's any further gunshot residue on that garment.
And so, obviously, many different types of objects could potentially have gunshot residue on them. It's just whatever is close to the firearm when it's fired, is that correct?
Correct.
And while the existence of gunshot residue on an object potentially can tell you the distance that object was from a firearm, does the absence of it tell you anything?
Actually, it's very difficult. In the absence of firearms discharge residue, it's really sort of, there's so many things that are possible. One of them could be, as I discussed before, the firearm was much further away than far away from the actual garment itself. There could be what's called just an intervening object, something in between the firearm and the garment. If there's something in between, it's going to fall on the actual intervening object. There are situations where blood can wash away any gunshot residue. If the fabric is washed, if it's raining outside, there's just so many different factors. So the absence, it's very limited what we can tell if there is no gunshot residue on a fabric.
So the presence of it could potentially tell you aspects of the distance of the firearm from the object. The absence really doesn't tell you anything definitive.
Correct. The presence means something, while the absence is very limited, if anything can be told, because there's nothing to analyze.
And did you examine evidence that was submitted to you in PBSO case number 15-133920?
Yes.
And may I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
And I'm showing you what's already been introduced into evidence as State's Exhibit 30. Can you go ahead and take a look at that, please, sir?
Yes.
And, sir, was this the submission number that you were presented with to analyze in this case number?
Yes, the Sheriff's Office submission number 42.
And is that a T-shirt from Corey Jones?
That's what it says on the package. I just analyzed a shirt. I don't know where it was taken from.
And obviously you recognize that bag as being the article that you actually took out and then examined, is that correct?
Yes, my initials are on the red seal itself, and it's also on the package. I write the case number, my initials, and the date on the package itself.
And did you perform the examination as we discussed generally relates to gunshot discharge residue?
Yes, I visually examined the shirt and also chemically tested it for those gunshot residues.
If you would, please explain to the jury your results and conclusions after your examination of that black T-shirt.
Well, during examination of the shirt, I found that the shirt had 3 holes in the shirt. And then I visually examined them and I chemically examined. However, I found no gunshot residue around or within the holes themselves.
And where were the holes located on that shirt, sir?
Could I just refer to my actual notes
Please.
in the file, okay?
Please, as long as they'll refresh your recollection.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I found 2 holes in the front of the shirt. If someone's wearing the shirt, it would be 1 hole was found on the upper right shoulder and sort of in the midsection on the right side of the shirt.
So the front right chest?
Yes, sort of right chest area, and then 1 sort of on the shoulder, and then 1 hole on the back right of the arm. That's where I found the holes on the shirt.
And so you microscopically examined and also chemically processed each one of those holes to determine whether or not you could find the potential existence of gunshot discharge residue?
Yes.
And all of that was negative, correct?
Correct. I didn't find any type of reaction with any of the chemicals or any visual examination.
And so absent any additional information about intervening objects, really being there when the actual gun was discharged, are you able to say definitively whether this shirt was, these holes in this shirt was created by a firearm that was close or distant or anything about the distance?
No. Again, as I described before, the absence of any type of residue, there's really nothing that I could really determine or come to any type of conclusion.
And so there's no indication or evidence that this was a contact or a close range shot, is that correct? Or shots, plural?
I did not find any evidence of that. The close contact shots have a typical pattern. Again, you would find some gunshot residue, other than if there was no intervening object. But also the physical hole itself would be much larger, and there'd be a lot more damage to it. But I didn't find any indication of that on the shirt.
And when we talk about close contact shots, what kind of distance are we talking about from the muzzle of the firearm to the object which is struck by a bullet?
That's sort of just sort of a general term, close contact. That can mean anywhere from half an inch to an inch to 3 inches. It really all depends on that's sort of, again, just sort of like a general umbrella term. But what it means is there's contact shot, which means exactly that the muzzle was actually in contact with the target. Then there's close contact, meaning, again, it was close. Again, a general term. And then there's mid-range, which is much further, and then long range, which is, again, much further away. So close contact just means close, but not in contact with the shirt itself.
And as far as mid-range, what kind of range are we talking about with that?
Again, that would mean anywhere from, and that would depend on really the opinion of the actual analyst. Mine would be anywhere from maybe 6 inches to out to 2 feet. That would be a mid-range, but that's, again, that's a opinion bracket.
And in that mid-range, from half a foot to 2 feet, do you also at times find gunshot discharge residue?
Again, in the absence of an intervening object,
Of course.
making sure, I would expect, yes, there to be a gunshot residue on a fabric, in my experience, because it's close enough in that you would actually find some gunshot residue, some type of gunshot residue, whether it's powder or some of the chemicals or lead.
And now when you start getting outside of that 2 to 3 foot range, is that when you start, without any intervening objects, of course, is that when you start seeing really the decline and really just not finding any type of gunshot residue, depending also on the round?
Typically, yes, exactly. And it really depends on the caliber, the size of the gun. But typically, again, in my experience, that's where it starts to sort of really dissipate. The powder particles and everything begin to dissipate. But again, it's all dependent on the type of gun, the size of the gun, the amount of ammunition, or the amount of power that the ammunition has, a lot of factors. But that's sort of a general rule of thumb, if you will.
And did this conclude the work that you performed in this case, sir?
Yes.
I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross. Just briefly, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good.
I just want to make sure that I'm clear on what you testified to. So what you're saying is that within 2 feet, you'd expect to see gunshot residue.
In my experience, yes, with all the various firearms that I've tested over the years, typically in about 2 feet, I would expect to see some sort of deposit of gunshot residue.
Okay, and then depending on the caliber of the gun, outside of 2 feet, and let me just back up for a second. This gun was a .40 caliber gun.
Actually, I
do you
don't
know?
I don't know, actually. I didn't analyze a gun in this
Okay,
case.
so you don't know based on the caliber. But basically speaking, though, outside of 3 feet, you don't expect to see gunshot residue.
Again, typically that's where it begins to fall off. That's where a lot of factors begin to come into play. Sometimes it will not deposit onto the target. Wind is a factor, weather is a factor, but that's where it begins to sort of become a lot more diffused, is around 3 feet. Again, depending on the caliber, much smaller calibers, it will be about that 3 feet level. Much larger calibers, it actually may go up further than that. So again, it really is caliber dependent.
Okay, so take with that in consideration.
Sure.
4 feet. No, you wouldn't expect to see it.
Again, depending on the caliber, but again, this is where, and we're just talking in generalities, that's where I would begin to see less and less in that area. Anything greater than 3 feet is where it becomes, I guess, much, much harder for that powder to reach. Because 4 feet doesn't sound very, very long, but it is for a gunshot residue. It is a pretty far distance, 3 to 4 feet.
Okay. So then just, just so that we're clear again.
Sure, sure.
So when we get out to 5, 10 feet, you're not expecting to see it at all?
I would not expect. That's getting really, really far away. So then that's what I would, that's what I would expect, again, just from my experience.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
No, sir.
You may step down, sir. Thank you very much. Watch your step. State, call your next witness.
State recalls Keith Thomas, Your Honor.
Okay, the state recalls Keith Thomas, please. Watch your step, sir. Mr. Thomas, you know the drill. Raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes.
All right, just have a seat. Go ahead, State.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Obviously, you've already explained to the jury your training, your experience, your education, your job and duties. I take it they have not changed in the past day and a half?
I had no training yesterday.
Very good. Let's go back to February 1st of 2016, sir. Were
Yes,
you
sir.
on duty?
I was.
And as part of your continuing participation in the investigation of this officer-involved shooting, case number 15-133920, did you receive evidence submissions number 225 and 226?
I did.
And did you secure that evidence, sir?
I did. I placed it in my secure evidence locker.
And the following day, did you then take photographs of that evidence?
I did.
And while you photographed that evidence, did you actually remove a projectile or bullet from one of the pieces of evidence, a log?
I did. A section of a pine tree. I split it lengthwise and recovered a projectile from within.
And did you also photograph this process?
I did.
Very good. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Showing what's been marked as states 76 composite A through K. Sir, please take a look at those if you will. Do you recognize those, sir?
I recognize all of them.
Do you think they really accurately depict what you photographed in February of 2016 as it relates to what we're discussing?
They do.
Asked to introduce as state's composite number 76, A through K, Your Honor.
Any objection? Admitted.
Asked to publish, Your Honor.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. So, starting with A, what are we looking at here, sir?
That would be the clear plastic bag that the metal fragment was packaged in.
And on this bag, we see actual multiple numbers, is that correct?
Correct.
And so this number here, this 282MM67408874, that's not your number, is it, sir?
That is not. That number was on the bag when I received it.
And that's not, and obviously, the item number one and that date of October 24th, 2015, that was not written by you, correct?
Correct.
So, this number here, is this your number or not your number here?
That is not my number.
And so we look at B. And is this the object that was inside, sir?
It is.
And was it sealed until you actually took it out of there, sir?
It was.
And then C, a close-up of that object, sir?
It is.
And this is the same copper-colored fragment that you're referring to?
Correct.
And D,
The reverse side of the same object.
and then actually, do we see on this bullet fragment a number that's been placed on there by somebody?
Yes. In the area, the dark discolored black area, the area cleaned away is a number matching the other numbers on the packaging.
And you did not place that there, correct, sir?
I did not.
And then E,
That would be the section of the pine tree.
And on either end of that section of pine tree, what do we see, sir?
PK nails.
And then in between those nails, is there a hole?
There is.
And did you also note the case number that was written on that piece of pine tree, sir?
I did.
And once again, did you write that number on the pine tree, sir?
Did not.
G.
Closer view of the defect.
And once again, when you say defect, what do you mean?
Alteration, in alteration to an object that wasn't there initially.
H.
That's after I split the log lengthwise to avoid the metal hatchet making contact with the projectile inside so as to protect the projectile from any damage. And that's a view of the log after it was split multiple times and eventually the projectile became visible within.
So during your process, you mentioned you used a hatchet in order to split the log, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then you split it in a manner as to not make any contact between the hatchet and the projectile that was contained in the log?
Correct.
I.
View of the same from further back.
And then we start seeing where that projectile is located.
Yes, we do.
J.
A close-up of the projectile once it was removed from the tree segment.
Okay.
Reverse side of the same.
So this is actually how this projectile or bullet looked being shot from a gun into a tree.
That's how it appeared.
And did you swab both the fragment and the projectile for possible DNA evidence, sir?
I did.
And did you submit those into property evidence?
I did.
And did you separately package the projectile that you pulled out of the tree from the tree?
I did.
And repackage the other items being the fragment and the log?
Correct, along with the nails with the log.
And submit all of that back into property evidence?
I did.
And when you separately package this right here, this projectile pulled from the tree, why did you separately package that from the log?
Because I knew that it would be likely the firearms unit would be examining that projectile to compare it to a weapon, and they would not be making any comparisons with the tree or the PK nails. So I packaged them separately for the convenience of the firearms unit, not to have a large box with busted up wooden pieces.
And did you also take some property found in the SUV belonging to Corey Jones at the site of Murphy's Towing back on November 6th of 2015, sir?
I did.
And did you submit that into property?
I did.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Thank you. Showing what has been marked as states 77 for identification purposes. Sir, can you take a look at that, please? Do you recognize that?
I do.
And how do you recognize it?
This is the bag that I packaged the vehicle registration in.
And that would have been the vehicle registration that was pulled out of the vehicle that was believed to be belonging to Corey Jones, sir?
Correct. It was in the gray SUV located in the lower center console.
Substantially the same condition as whenever you packaged it, sir?
It is. My original seal is in place and intact, and it does not appear to have been opened since.
Asked to introduce the 77, Your Honor.
Admitted.
And Did you also take a photograph of this registration, sir?
I don't recall whether I photographed it.
Can I go ahead and publish on it?
Yes.
And there's some gloves right up there, sir. There you are. And is this what was found, sir?
Yes, it is.
And publish, Your Honor.
Yes.
And then these items, is this a vehicle registration for that silver in color Hyundai SUV, sir?
It is.
And the name on that vehicle registration, is that one belonging to Mr. Corey Lamar Jones?
Yes, it is.
If you would please go ahead and put that back in the packaging, sir, I appreciate it. And sir, you testified previously about being present for a light reflectivity test, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And as you previously discussed and or shown and or introduced in the evidence, there were photographs taken of that process, was there not?
Correct. Photographs as well as a short video clip.
And you also said, well, like you just said, a short video, is that correct?
Correct. It was a very short video with the camera that I took the still photos with. I just put it into a video mode. I didn't use a dedicated video camera for capturing video.
Yep.
78 cent evidence, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And I'll get it ready to publish.
Yes. Just turn some of the lights off. I don't want to hit the wrong switch.
Okay.
What hits those? This light here? Go ahead. The center ones? No? Scared? Okay.
And sir, you watched this, just one second.
Yep.
And sir, you've watched this video prior to coming in here and testifying here today, is that correct?
I viewed the video last night. That was the first time I viewed it since I filmed it.
Since you filmed it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Go ahead and play it. We see the person holding the firearm, manipulating it in different positions, is that correct?
Correct.
What was the intent of that?
We were trying to replicate the appearance of a flickering laser pointer, laser max, on the weapon. We knew obviously it couldn't be a guide rod laser max, but there are bolt-on lasers that may be mistaken for another product, and we were just trying to recreate the appearance of the regular flicker that one would expect from a laser sight on a pistol.
And were you able to actually get this highly reflective gun to reflect light?
We did. It mostly reflected the streetlights, but we were eventually able to get it to reflect the red light from the traffic signal.
And as you previously testified, although it reflected light, did this look like a Laser Max laser to you at all?
It,
Overruled. Yes or no?
To be clear, did this look like a Laser Max laser to you at all?
it did not look like any type of laser to me at all.
Did this video change your opinion or thoughts on that at all?
No. In this video, I can see more of the red light reflected from the traffic signal than I did on the small monitor on the back of the camera, but it does nothing to help me make it appear as a flickering laser.
Actually, does it make you even more sure about what you had said?
It does, because the shape is more apparent, that it's not even round.
And is there anything, a Laser Max laser, is it just a straight laser or does it actually blink on and off?
They blink on and off.
Is there a ratio of the on and off or the pulses that is consistent when you're dealing with one of those lasers?
It would be very consistent. It may vary from model to model, but any given model of laser, when it's flickering, the ratio of on time to off time will be the same, and the rate of the flickering, the frequency will be the same. It will be a very consistent appearance and not jittery as we were able to show with the traffic light.
And the laser itself, you mentioned guide rod. Is that, when you're looking at a firearm, is the guide rod on the bottom of the barrel right there? Is that what you're talking about?
It would be directly beneath the barrel on that type of pistol.
And really the reflection that you saw during this, I'll say test, but process, was most of it more off just the side of the highly reflective gun?
Overruled. Go ahead.
Was most of it off the side of this highly reflective gun?
We definitely were able to get better reflections off of the side of the gun, but they weren't capturing the traffic light. They were capturing the street lights. The area, as the video shows, the area was not lit with white light like you'd expect by sunlight. The artificial street lights have a dingy orange look to them, and that's what we were able to capture off the side of the gun.
Okay. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross.
Good morning again, sir.
Good morning.
Did you bring that video clip with you when you testified 2 days ago?
I don't bring evidence with me into court at all.
Okay. Were you asked, you had provided that video to the state, though, hadn't you?
Objection, Your Honor. What's the relevance?
Overruled. You may answer. Yes or no?
Yes, I submitted. It was on the same, excuse me, it was on the same photo card as the images, the still images. It's the same camera, the same media card, the photos, a video clip, additional photos, package it and submit it.
And just so the record's clear, you were not asked to play that video 2 days ago when you testified before, correct?
Correct. The first I knew of any need to review the video was yesterday.
Yesterday?
Yes.
And who informed you of that?
Objection, Your Honor. It's wholly irrelevant.
Well, I'll let you answer. There's a jury instruction that says lawyers are allowed to talk to their witnesses, et cetera. But go ahead. You can answer the question.
And I would ask that that instruction be read at this time, Your Honor.
Okay. I'll dig it out.
I was informed that the proceeding today may involve the reflectivity test that we did with that laser, may involve the video, and I requested and was provided with a copy so that I was able to review it.
And the video that we just saw was approximately how long in length? Did you count that?
Slightly over 1 minute.
Right. And so If one were to see 1 second, 1.5 seconds, or 2 seconds, you'd see a lot different from what you saw, right?
True.
Thank you.
And the jury instruction I'll be giving at a later date. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, so this is the portion relevant to this discussion we've had. It is entirely proper for a lawyer to talk to a witness about what testimony the witness would give if called to the courtroom. The witness should not be discredited by talking to a lawyer about his or her testimony.
Another question. And who was it that told you to look at it?
Mr. Fernandez?
Thank you.
Any redirect?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
So I actually talked to you and prepared you to get up here and testify in this trial, correct?
We spoke after I had viewed the video through, he provided it through his subordinates. I'm not sure what the proper term there would be. Assistants. There we go. They were able to get the video to me, and then I viewed it, and then we had a brief discussion on the telephone.
To prepare you to come here and actually testify in a trial?
Correct.
And so, video we saw shows light reflecting off of a highly reflective gun, is that correct?
Correct.
Does it does it do anything to prove why a person may have a gun out at night?
Sustained. Sustained. New question.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
You may step down, sir. Thank you very much. State, call your next witness.
If I may, Sergeant Package. The state will call Jimmy Palma, Your Honor.
Good morning. Meet Deputy Dunkley right there. Raise your right hand. Face Mr. Clerk for me.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
All right, you're going to have a seat right up there. The chair swivels and rolls. Get yourself comfortable. Once you've done that, please take the microphone, put it close to your mouth. Tell us your full name and spell it for us.
My full name is Jimmy Palma, Palma.
Terrific. State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
You would please explain to the jury how you are employed.
I'm a forensic scientist assigned to the Firearms unit at the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office's Crime Laboratory.
And what are your duties as a forensic scientist with the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office Firearms Unit?
I examine guns, determine whether the safeties are all functional. I evaluate them for anything that's odd, and I test fire the firearm for two reasons. One is to determine whether it is functional, and the second reason is to obtain representative cartridge cases and representative bullets from that particular gun for later analysis.
And how long have you been employed in this capacity, sir?
For approximately 8 years.
And does that encompass your entire experience working in the area of firearms identification and analysis?
Yes, it does.
And what kind of educational background and training do you have in addition to that?
I obtained a bachelor's degree in chemistry with a specialization in forensic science from St. Thomas University, located in Miami, Florida. And I completed a 2-year training program at the Sheriff's Office, which consisted of everything from the history of firearms identification all the way through microscopic comparisons of fired components and everything in between. I also trained with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in the restoration of obliterated serial numbers. And I also trained with them in their digital cartridge case database.
Are you a member of any professional organization, sir?
Yes, I'm a regular and certified member of AFTI, which stands for the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners.
And does the entirety of your work at Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office dedicated to the field of firearms identification and analysis?
Yes, it is.
And have you ever testified as an expert?
Yes, I have.
How many times?
Approximately 18 times.
And sir, if you would, please just explain what firearms identification is.
Firearms identification is a discipline of forensic science which has as its primary purpose to establish whether fired cartridge casings or fired bullets were fired from a particular gun.
And what makes that possible?
Well, during the manufacturing process of a gun, there are small microscopic imperfections or irregularities on different surfaces of the gun, such as the firing pin or the barrel. These imperfections or irregularities are going to create a pattern of lines or striations or impressions onto the fired components, and this pattern tends to repeat. So that allows us to establish a relationship between ammunition, fired ammunition, and the gun.
And so let's break it down to different parts of the gun here. So the barrel itself, you said it has different striations. Are those like the lands and grooves that run the length of the barrel?
Yes, the lands and grooves are part of that imperfection process. The lands and grooves themselves tend to be a broader type of marking, but within those small lands and grooves the lands and grooves are spiral cuts inside of that barrel. And the purpose of the rifling, the lands and grooves, is to impart a spin on the bullet for accuracy purposes. But within those lands and grooves, there are tiny microscopic imperfections, and these microscopic imperfections are what mark the bullet.
And so while the rifling, and actually whether it may twist to the right and how much it would twist to the right, or whether it twists to the left and how much, would be indicative of the manufacturer, the actual particular imperfections are unique to that specific firearm.
That's correct. The left or right twist is a class characteristic. It's common in many guns, but the unique imperfections themselves within those lands and grooves are what make that firearm unique. It's analogous to a fingerprint on a human being.
And then the same thing, whenever you're dealing with the actual cartridge casing that is ejected, are there marks that are left by the firearm on that casing that enable you to then compare the casing to the firearm and make an identification as to whether or not that casing was ejected from that particular firearm?
Yes, there are. There are markings on the firing pin, there are markings on the breech face, and there are markings on other parts, such as the extractor and the ejector.
And so when you say the firing pin, if you would just explain what the firing pin is that's striking that primer section of that casing.
Yes, sir. So when the trigger is pulled, there's a small pin inside of the gun that's designed to strike the portion of the casing that's called a primer. That once the primer is struck, that primer ignites a small spark, and the small spark essentially ignites the main powder charge inside of the casing. The powder starts to quickly burn, pressures start to increase, and the increase in pressure and heat push the bullet out of the barrel and also pushes back on the cartridge casing. So the firing pin is what actually initiates the whole firing process.
And that firing pin striking that primer section of the casing, does that leave a mark that is unique to that firearm?
Yes, it can, yes.
And do you use that in your analysis to determine and assist you to whether or not casings are fired from a particular firearm?
Yes, the firing pin is one of the markings that we can use. There are other markings, but that is one of them.
You mentioned the breech face.
Yes, sir.
And what other markings would you also look at on a casing in order to attempt to identify it and compare it to the firearm that it was discharged?
So we can look at as I mentioned before, the firing pin. The breech face is basically the face of the gun that the casing sits on. There are markings on the breech face that transfer over. There are also markings on the small hole called the aperture where the firing pin protrudes through. That aperture is going to create a set of pattern, a set of lines or striations. There are others such as chamber marks. So when that casing, when the shot goes off, the casing expands, and the whole surface around that chamber where the casing sits in, that essentially can also mark the casing and create markings. And then there's an extractor and ejector that can also create markings. The extractor, as the name states, basically extracts that casing out of the chamber, and the ejector's job is to hit the casing and knock it off and knock it out of the gun.
So each time any part of that firearm touches that casing and discharging the projectile bullet out of that barrel, it can leave marks, and then those marks are going to be unique to that firearm.
Correct. Those microscopic marks are what we are examining and comparing to our test fires that we know were fired from that gun because we test fired them from that gun.
And what is your process for examining for those marks, sir?
For the microscopic work, what we do is we have this instrument called a comparison microscope, And it's essentially two microscopes that are connected together by an optical bridge. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to set one specimen on the right, usually our test fires, and an unknown specimen on the left. And what the comparison microscope allows us to do, it allows us to put both images side by side, and we can view those striations. We can superimpose the images and look at them side by side.
And then also, when you're testing actual firearms themselves, how do you process that examination as far as whether it's operational and then to obtain evidence for your comparisons?
Yes, what we do first is like I said before, we examine the gun, make sure everything looks normal. We then take the firearm and using our ammunition, we test fire the gun to obtain the casings and the bullet from that gun, the representative casings and bullets. And those are the ones that essentially are going to be used on the comparison microscope. But what we do is we test fire into a water tank. And what the water tank does is it allows us to obtain bullets without damage. It slows the bullet down in the water, and we can obtain the bullets without damage.
And so if you actually shot the bullet into any other substance, whatever you shot it into could actually affect that bullet or projectile and leave additional markings on it, which would then in turn affect your ability to identify it to that fire.
That's correct.
Now, did you examine evidence submitted to you in this case, PBSO case number 15-133920?
Yes, I did.
And may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm showing you what has been introduced as States 18. If you would, please take a look at that. And do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize that?
I wrote the case number, my initials, and the submission number and the date in which I opened up the packaging.
Very good. And so, did this come into your custody on October 19th of 2015?
Your Honor, may I please refer to my notes?
You may.
October 19th of 2015, yes.
Very good. And did you examine these 6 individual casings?
Yes, I did.
And what, in detail, what were the conclusions that you reached in reference to these 6 casings?
I determined that all 6 casings were of Winchester brand. They were all 40 Smith & Wesson caliber. And essentially, they were all identified as having been fired from the same gun.
And so they're all 40 caliber casings, is that correct?
Yes, 40 Smith & Wesson caliber.
And all fired from the same gun, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Are you able to tell whether, and let's discuss the difference between a semi-automatic firearm and a revolver?
Yes, the difference, they're both handguns. Revolvers are handguns and semi-automatic pistols are handguns. The difference is that with a revolver, the ammunition is loaded onto a round cylinder, and after every shot, the fired casing remains inside of that cylinder until the individual removes those fired casings. With a semi-automatic pistol, after every shot, you're essentially going to get a fired cartridge casing ejected out of the pistol, and the weapon is going to automatically load that next cartridge or ammunition in the chamber, waiting for the next trigger pull.
And so those ejection and extraction marks that you would find on a casing that is fired from a bullet fired out of a semi-automatic firearm, bless you, you would not necessarily see those out of a revolver, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so with these casings, were you able to tell by looking at the casings alone as to whether or not they were fired from a semi-automatic pistol or firearm as opposed to a revolver?
Yes, I was.
And how was that, sir?
Because these particular casings had what's called a drag mark. So revolvers do not have drag marks. What happens is during the firing process, the firing pin hits that primer, and in this particular pistol, the barrel is actually going to drop while that firing pin is in contact with the cartridge case, with the primer, and that essentially creates what's called a drag mark. Well, that dropping motion is non-existent in revolvers, so I knew that this was a semi-automatic pistol.
Very good. Approach Clerk, Your Honor.
Yes.
showing what's been introduced as States 1. Sir, can you please take a look at that? And do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize that?
I wrote the case number, my initials, and submission number on the box.
And did this also come into your custody at October 19th of 2015, sir?
Yes, it did.
And what is that?
What is the item?
Yes, sir.
It is it's a Jimenez Arms pistol, semi-automatic pistol.
And what is the caliber?
It is .380 auto caliber.
And if you will, please detail any examinations that you performed on that .380 pistol, sir.
Yes, what I did first was I examined it for safety, made sure that the safety was working. There was nothing unusual about the firearm. And then I obtained test fires from the gun. I took the firearm down and test fired it into the water tank.
Were you able to determine whether or not the firearm was functional?
Yes, it was functional.
Was the safety operational?
Yes, it was.
So if the safety's on, the gun is safe and is not firing. If the safety's off, the gun is now live and can be fired.
That's correct.
And with this Jimenez Arms .380, what side of the firearm is the safety located?
If I'm pointing forward, the safety is located on the left-hand side.
And what is the purpose of that, sir?
The purpose of that is so that with the thumb, with a simple switch of a thumb, a right-hand shooter could put the firearm into safety or take it out of safety.
And are the large majorities of shooters predominantly right-handed?
I would say so.
Now, can guns be altered to move safeties to the right side for left-handed shooters?
From my experience, you can order a gun with a safety on the opposite end for a left-hand shooter.
Throughout all of your experience, have you ever seen or heard of an Jimenez Arms .380 having a safety on the right side?
I have not experienced a Jimenez Arms of this model with the safety on the opposite side, no.
Does it have a financial cost to it whenever you move the safety to the other side?
I would think so.
Is this gun on the more expensive end or the cheaper end of firearms?
Oh, no, these are cheaper firearms.
They're very inexpensive.
Yes, inexpensive.
And while it's a functional firearm, did any of those 6 casings that were .40 caliber match that gun?
No, they did not.
And was there any firearms evidence that was submitted that is associated with that firearm, the .380?
No, I did not have any fired components that I had to compare to this particular pistol. No.
And in your analysis, you created some test fires when you were testing the functionality of that, is that correct?
That's correct.
Your Honor,
Yes.
States 79 for identification purposes. If you'll please take a look at that. And do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize that?
I created this packaging, and I have all my information on here, case number, initials, signature. These are test fires from the Jimenez Arms .380 caliber pistol.
Same condition as whenever you created it and submitted it?
There's a tamper-resistant seal that I don't recall putting on there.
Asked to introduce 79, Your Honor.
Any objection? Admitted.
Thank you. Clerk, Your Honor.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want this one?
Showing the witness what's been previously introduced as State's Exhibit 3. Can you take a look at that, please, sir?
Yes, sir.
And do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize that?
I wrote my initials, submission number, and case number on the box.
And did this also come into your custody October 19th, 2015?
Yes, it did.
And sir, what is that?
This is a Glock pistol. It's a Glock pistol, 40 Smith & Wesson caliber. Model number is 22 Gen 4.
And the Model 22 Glock 40, is that denote the size of the firearm itself?
Yes, that's a standard size pistol. For
The standard
Glocks.
or full-size firearm?
Correct.
And once again, did you examine that pistol?
Yes, I did.
And did you test fire it?
Yes, I did.
Did you find it to be functional?
Yes, sir.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing states number 80 for identification purposes. And you recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
Are those test fires from that same Model 22 Glock 40 caliber pistol?
These are actually the test fires from the other Glock.
81, Your Honor. 81.
Yes, these are test fires from this model Glock, the Model 22 Glock.
Very good. Same condition, substantially the same condition as whenever you created and submitted them, sir?
Yes, sir.
Asked to introduce as 81, Your Honor.
Any objection? No objection. Admitted.
Obviously, that Model 22 40 caliber Glock pistol is fully functional.
Yes, it was.
Did you also test the casings that were found, the 6 casings from, that you described earlier, to this firearm?
I did not.
Okay. And did you, is that because you had tested those casings against another firearm prior?
That's correct, because they were already identified as having been fired from another Glock pistol.
And did you have any firearms evidence that was submitted to you that you associated with this Model 22 40 caliber full-size Glock pistol?
No.
Approach Clerk, Your Honor.
Yes.
Showing the witness what has been introduced as states number 2, Your Honor. You'll please take a look at that.
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And once again, you recognize it because of the markings on the box that were created?
That's correct.
Another piece of evidence that came into your custody October 19th of 2015?
Yes, sir.
And what is that, sir?
This is a Glock Model 27.
Is that also a 40 caliber pistol?
Yes, sir. It's the same caliber, 40 Smith & Wesson.
And so as opposed to the Model 22, what is the Model 27?
The Model 27 is a subcompact pistol, so it's a smaller pistol.
So same caliber,
Yes, sir.
same manufacturer,
Correct.
just one is physically smaller than the other.
Yes, it is. Correct.
Make it easier to conceal.
It is easier to conceal. Yes.
And once again, did you test fire this weapon, sir?
Yes, I did.
Approach, Your Honor.
Yes.
States number 80 for identification purposes. You recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
Once again, is this the test fires from that Glock 40 caliber Model 27?
Yes, sir.
And is that the same original packaging that you had placed it in and substantially the same condition?
Yes, sir.
Asked to introduce as states 80, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No objection, sorry.
It's okay. Admitted.
And once again, this firearm's fully functional?
Yes, it is. Yes.
And did you make a comparison of this firearm to the 6 casings that were located from the scene and submitted to you?
Yes, I did.
And what were your findings and conclusions of that comparison?
The 6 casings that I examined prior to this were identified as having been fired from this Glock, Model 27.
And did you go through the same process of having the test fires and comparing those casings from the test fires to the casings that were actually located on scene, sir?
Yes, sir.
And did you also receive any additional firearms evidence to compare in this case?
I received some fired bullets and bullet jackets.
Okay. Let's start with approach to witness, Your Honor.
Yes.
What's been introduced as states number 23, and I'll go ahead and take that.
Yes, sir.
And do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize that?
The same as the others, I wrote the case number, my initials, and the date in which I opened the evidence.
Once again, evidence that came into your custody October 19th of 2015?
Yes, sir.
And if you would please describe in detail the examination and any conclusions that you made. Well, first off, what is that?
What I have is a .40 caliber bullet with 6 right rifling, and it's a jacketed hollow point bullet.
And does it have any type of identification as far as where it came from?
No, the conclusions were inconclusive when I compared
And I mean on the packaging, sir.
on the packaging. According to the packaging, it's a sealed envelope labeled projectile from left arm.
Very good. So this projectile from the left arm, did you make examination and any conclusions of this projectile?
I compared this projectile to both Glock pistols, and they were inconclusive. The results were inconclusive.
And so, if you will, please explain what you did and how you compared it.
So I set the test-fired bullets on one side of the comparison microscope, and I set this particular projectile on the other side, and I was looking for those microscopic markings. The class characteristics were the same as both pistols, which again, the class is the overall, the class characteristics are those overall broad characteristics that are commonly found in all Model 22s or Model 27s. But when I looked at the individual characteristics, there was an inconclusive result. There was not enough there for a solid conclusion.
And so when you say class characteristics, what are you talking about?
I'm referring to the caliber. There are hundreds or thousands of .40 caliber weapons. I'm also referring to the rifling. So this particular bullet had a 6 right rifling, which both Glock pistols also had 6 right. Those are just broad characteristics which can be used to eliminate a pistol, but it cannot. It can be used for exclusion, but not inclusion.
And so this is a projectile that's a .40 caliber projectile fired out of a Glock pistol, but you're not able to determine whether or not it was fired out of the specific Model 27 or Model 22 that you had in your custody.
Right. The results were inconclusive. Correct.
And is it a jacketed hollow point bullet, sir?
Yes, sir.
Can you please explain what a jacketed hollow point bullet is?
Yes. So most bullets have a lead core on the inside, and the majority of them have a copper jacket or a brass jacket. Well, this particular design is a jacketed hollow point, which on the nose of the bullet, there's a hollow cavity drilled out of it. And the purpose of this cavity is so that upon impact, the bullet actually mushrooms open. And the goal of that mushrooming is to slow that bullet down so that it doesn't perforate and hit something unintentional after that surface.
And so the goal is that when that bullet strikes its intended target, it stays within that target and doesn't then move through the target.
Correct.
Does that maximize potential damage to that target too?
In terms of damage, it just depends on where the bullet strikes.
And so, while consistent with the type of ammunition fired out of the Glock Model 27 that was in your custody, you could not make a specific identification.
That's correct.
And when you have a lack of corresponding individual characteristics, where might that originate from? How might that occur?
There's various reasons for a lack of corresponding individual characteristics. One, depending on what that bullet hits, a lot of that information that's written on there or transferred from the gun onto that bullet can be overwritten, just depending on the damage. Another reason for an inconclusive result is if your gun barrel is highly, it's dirty, where those imperfections don't mark the bullet very well. So those are just two of various reasons that you can have a lack of those corresponding individual characteristics.
Obviously, a bullet striking an object like a person, if it comes into contact with things such as bone, that will potentially affect the bullet itself and your ability to make that comparison.
Yes, it absolutely can, depending on what that bullet comes into contact with.
And do you find that to be common when you have bullets that are extracted out of an individual that have come into contact with their bones during the process of being shot?
Yes, it's common. Yes.
Were you also provided copper and lead fragments from from another arm, sir? Or actually from an arm of the victim?
Yes.
Right, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing what's been introduced as states 22. And what is the description on that, please, sir?
The description is a sealed envelope labeled fragments from the right arm. And there's a second description, sealed envelope labeled fragments from the left arm.
And so will you please describe in detail the examinations and conclusions that you reach regarding these fragments from both the right and left arm?
Yes, what I had was I had a piece of lead and one piece of copper that did not bear any individual characteristics at all. Along with that, I had another piece of copper fragment and 3 small pieces of lead that also did not bear any individual characteristics at all.
And when you say there's no individual characteristics, once again, were these small pieces or fragments, or were they large projectiles that appeared to be intact?
No, these were small pieces of fragments.
Is it common not to have those individual characteristics with such small pieces of fragments, sir?
Yes, it is.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to show you 66 and 68, which have been introduced as evidence. But lastly, so both of these pieces here, 22 and 23, your understanding is that these were taken out of the body of the victim and then provided to you for analysis?
That's what I found on the labels, yes. Correct.
Can you please look at 66 and 68? And do you recognize those, sir?
I recognize the brown paper bag. Let's see here. Yes, I do.
And do you recognize those through the submission numbers according to your agency there, sir?
That's correct.
And is that the 225-01 and 225-06?
Yes, sir.
Do these also come into your custody, but on a separate date of January 28, 2016?
These came into my custody on February 10th of 2016.
Gotcha.
Yes.
See you back in 5 minutes. Lawyers, take the same, 5 minutes.